ситуация в жизни сложилась.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says the use of force by Russian troops in Ukraine is a choice of last resort. At a news conference near Moscow, Putin said Russia reserved the right to intervene militarily if there was lawlessness in eastern Ukraine. He also said that any country considering sanctions should think twice, saying that all threats against Russia are counterproductive. Conservative MP James Bezan recently visited Ukraine as part of a delegation led by Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird, and he joins us from Ottawa this morning. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Beverly.
So with all of the developments, having been there, now returned home, and the developments in the interim, not the least of which is Putin saying they have the right to do everything that everybody else has told him not to do, sounds like he's not going to bow to any pressure from the Western world.
And that's very unfortunate. We think that the only way you can de-escalate the situation is for President Putin to withdraw his troops from the Crimea. This is definitely an invasion. And as Prime Minister Harper said yesterday, that his actions are unacceptable, that Canada is reviewing all of our bilateral relations with Russia. And, of course, we will continue to move to isolate Russia, both economically and diplomatically, bringing forward the appropriate sanctions as this crisis continues to evolve. And that includes ejecting Russia from the G8.
So, and Mr. Bezan, let me ask you about the bilateral relations. You know, in terms of, we understand, you know, the economic sanctions, the diplomatic sanctions that are being considered. What about, because I understand there's already been meetings that have been canceled by the U.S., some high-level trade meetings. What can Canada do on that front?
Well, as we've already done, we are not going to Sochi for the Paralympic Games. We've canceled their delegation, nor will we prepare for the planned G8 summit in Sochi in June of this year. And, you know, there is continued dialogue that's happening with like-minded nations, with our allies, including the G7 and NATO allies. And Prime Minister Harper and Minister John Baird have been in a flurry of activities and phone calls in coordinating the next steps the international community has to take. So there is going to be a number of diplomatic levers pulled. We have demarched the Russian ambassador and asked him to carry back to Moscow the disappointment and the condemnation of Canada, and we have recalled our ambassador. So there's still a lot of other levers that can be pulled, but of course we need to work in unison with like-minded nations, especially the European Union, who have the biggest trade and economic relationship with Russia.
Tell me about the meetings that you had when you were there and what people were saying. Of course, there's an interim government. What that Putin says, of course, is not valid, that Yanukovych is still the president. But tell me what the Ukrainians were saying to you in the meetings that you took part in.
Well, we had very productive meetings, meeting with government leaders, with the new transitional government, the new Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, as well as President Turchinov, who's the acting president until the May 25th elections. We met with the organizers of the Euromaidan activists that took place on the streets of Maidan, and met with a number of other civil society leaders, and just walked the Maidan and talked to people there. So they're anxious. There's no question that there's trepidation, concern about their future, concern about the Russian invasion that's occurring in the Crimea, and economic uncertainty. All they wanted to do is develop a peaceful, stable, democratic country, now that they've got the yoke of Yanukovych and his regime off their shoulders. But Yanukovych emptied the treasury, took a great deal of the gold reserves that were built up, and of course divvied up the economy amongst a few of his friends. So with that type of control and lack of sharing of wealth, there is a great deal of help that has to happen, and that's why we went, is to show that Canada supports them, to have those government-to-government meetings, but also to do some fact-finding as to what next steps need to happen, whether it's through the International Monetary Fund, which is doing a technical investigation right now as we speak in Ukraine, but also how that leads to economic assistance.
And also even NATO considering its options at the moment. Mr. Bezan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.